Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission's Site Inventory for Affordable Housing webinar. We have a couple quick reminders shown here on the screen, if you could just take a minute to review them. As Emily stated, this meeting will be recorded and available on our website as well as our YouTube account. Um, if you see that third bullet point, we mentioned if you wanted to add your affiliation, that would be great as we get to the Q&A period, just so Tom can have a bit of a reference as he's answering any questions of your affiliation. I'll give everybody a minute there. And with that, I'll say we have been partnering with Camoin Associates since 2022, advancing our housing work. Today, we have Tom Dwortsky of Camoin Associates here to talk about the process and methodology of developing the prioritized site inventory for affordable housing development, property profiles document, which has been released this month. We'll be dropping some links in the chat throughout this webinar of that document and some other relevant housing documents that we've worked on with Camoin that are available on our website. After Tom's quick overview, we will then hear some updates of housing work in Lincoln County from Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission's Executive Director, Emily Raby. We will then open it up to a robust Q&A, so please write down your questions as Tom is talking, and we hope to be able to answer them. And with that, I will pass it off to Tom.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me here this afternoon. Good to see a great turnout here. Lots of interest in housing, I see, which is good. So I'll just be going through a few slides here just to kind of give a little bit of overview of what led up to the prioritized site inventory. And then, as Laura said, happy to answer questions about methodology and approach and that kind of stuff for anyone that wants to get more into the weeds of it. So back in 2022, Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission engaged Camoin to do a housing needs assessment. So that was looking broadly at the county's housing needs. And we did a lot of data analysis and research and came up with kind of a kind of target for the amount of housing units that would be needed in Lincoln County to support the needs of existing and future residents. And we came out with something like between 800 and 900 units needed countywide to satisfy that need. And then we did kind of a potential breakdown of how the different communities in the county could satisfy pieces of that need, kind of based on their existing population, their proximity to transportation and services. And, clearly the larger communities are going to be absorbing more of that need than some of the smaller, very rural communities. And then specifically, one of the strategies that came out of that was an assessment that called for compiling a prioritized inventory of the sites. So this was specifically looking at, okay, now we know what kind of housing is needed and where. Now we need sites to make sure that it can be built. And so that was the impetus for launching this next phase, which is the site inventory. And the goal here was really to provide developers as being the primary audience, but also other stakeholders in the community with a really data-driven catalog of feasible sites for housing across the county. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how we did this. So to identify those housing opportunity sites, the process was first kind of kickoff and data collection. We reviewed the goals and the criteria with LCRPC here around what types of sites and who we were looking for, and really overarching kind of criteria were to try to find as many sites that were large enough to accommodate a moderate number of units at least, rather than trying to find one-off sites to find, one or two units here and there, trying to maximize the potential to try to get to that, almost 900 units of need that were identified in the study. So that was broadly the criteria. So large sites was kind of an important criteria, along with things you would normally look at when you're doing development. We don't want steep slopes, wetlands. Ideally, the zoning would already be appropriate for housing, proximity to utilities either nearby or already serving the site. And then certain communities in the county have growth areas where development, the policy is to focus development in those areas. So that would be another plus for housing development, avoiding conservation lands, all those sorts of things. So that was kind of identifying what the goals were for the county and the criteria we're looking at. Then, as part of the scope, we did some outreach to municipalities. So, the staff at Lincoln County here kind of helped initiate that, where we did some back and forth with some of the municipalities staff to identify parcels that maybe those towns have already, through past processes, identified as having housing potential, so we could include those as well and not start from scratch if some work had already been done in certain communities. And again, there's 17, 18, I probably have the exact number wrong, of municipalities in the county, so a lot of different towns to work with, and each town kind of has their own process and their own information and needs available. So a lot of this was just kind of coordinating existing information. And then simultaneously, we did the kind of GIS analysis as well, where we started with parcel data for the whole county, which the staff helped us get together, which was also an effort. I know Laura spent a lot of time on that. And so we had like a look at all the parcels in the county, and then we used the criteria that I discussed before. So kind of isolating large parcels within growth areas, within proximity to infrastructure and utilities, close to schools, community services, those sorts of things, to start to narrow it down. And then, we were able to narrow it down from the whole county worth of parcels to kind of the next cut. And then from there, it was more of a kind of qualitative, subjective process of trying to rule out certain parcels that didn't make sense. Maybe they met the criteria, but, for other various reasons, they just didn't make sense. So we were able to narrow it down to a manageable list. And then that's when we did the next phase. So if you could go to the next slide, please. This is then where we looked at density calculations for the different parcels that had been identified on that kind of, we'll call it, instead of a short list, kind of a long-ish list, right? So ultimately, we were trying to get to 30 sites through the GIS analysis and work. So far, we had more than that, probably in the, I don't know, 40 to 50 range. And then we tried to narrow it down to the 30 that we ultimately wanted to get to. And so the staff helped us here doing density calculations for the different sites. So based on existing zoning, how many units could be built on the site. And then, so, using, floor area ratios or density guidelines in the zoning codes for each of the different municipalities, the staff were able to calculate how many units could be supported on these parcels. And then, the types of housing that were allowed, whether it's single or multi-unit. And then so once we had all of that, the next step was then contacting property owners. And so again, the goal here is to identify parcels that have real development potential. And by contacting owners, we are able to gauge who would actually be interested in selling or developing their parcel for housing. And then ultimately, we ruled out any that were that didn't fit that criteria. So we made, a bunch of phone calls, contacted owners. We got in touch with quite a lot, not everyone on the list, but we were able to track down a good number of folks. And, we had a range of answers from absolutely not, I want this property for my kids, have no interest in selling it, to yes, like, please let me know who's interested. Let's get this done. So based on that, we were able to then prioritize again from that list the ones that had the most viability. So we knew, you know, physically, infrastructure wise, they were viable, zoning wise, they made sense, and then the property owner was amenable to development in some way. Um, and then we passed that along, and then to the staff here, and then we developed the brochure that you've all seen, the inventory of the site. So each site kind of has its own page in the booklet there, and the idea being it could be passed along to developers to flip through and kind of, you know, let them know what's possible for development in terms of type of housing, how many units could be built, you know, the size of the sites, whether it has infrastructure and those kinds of things. So um, I guess just the last slide here then. As I said, there's 30 sites altogether in the book there. Has all that kind of basic information about the site. And it's really supposed to be kind of developer friendly reference tool. You know, this is just kind of the very beginning of any pre-development work that would happen on any of these sites, but it kind of aggregates them all in one place. Interested developers know that there's interest in developing these parcels and kind of saves some of the legwork on behalf of the developer to try to identify sites that they might be interested in. So, you know, in the book it says, you know, to reach out to staff with any questions and those sorts of things, and you know, staff will be more than willing to work with developers that might be interested in developing in the county. So that was kind of the process, and I'll pass it back to the team here, and then again, happy to answer questions about details later on.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom, for that coverage and explanation of the overall project. Before we get to Q&A, we at the RPC wanted to just give some brief updates on the work we've been doing in housing generally, so outcomes and other strategies from the housing study that we worked with Camoin on that was released back in 2023, but also next steps with this document in particular, and where we go from here. So as far as general work, since the housing study was implemented, we've been working with municipalities on ordinance writing. This includes as you're probably all familiar and sick of me hearing, LD 2003 implementation. We worked with a lot of municipalities on that from 2023 through early 2024 before it was required to be adopted in July 1st of last year. We've also been working with the county administration and county commissioners to allocate 1.5 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding, both for affordable housing construction to developers through a application process, as well as through planning grants to municipalities, which is really exciting and a great use of those funds because it's really a once in a lifetime injection into our county. And the commissioners felt that it was important to include housing as part of the allocation of funds that also went to broadband, sewer, and water infrastructure, as well as some public safety improvements. The other piece that we've been working on for a while now is with DECD's Housing Opportunities Program. So we were awarded back in November of 2023 a service provider grant that is just going to be wrapping up next month. And that was to bring additional technical assistance to municipalities around housing. And that we've done through a number of talks. It helped fund our staff time on this project. And one of the final projects that we're wrapping up is working with the town of Boothbay to update their entire land use ordinance to make it more user-friendly, especially for those that are looking to develop housing, whether it's a single family, an ADU, a duplex, quadplex, or something larger. We're also excited to be partnering with the Maine Community Development Association. I know Jen Peters is on this call from Sunrise County Economic Development Council on creating a housing master class. So this is going to be beginning in the summer. And we're looking at 9 courses over the course of summer into early fall, covering a number of topics on housing, front things like, you know, creating your project planning team, working with public engagement, accessing developers, working on, preparing an RFP for developers, land use, funding and financing. So it'll cover a massive number of topics. And when you're through that 9-week course, you will have, materials in front of you to really implement your vision for housing. So there will be more to come from us in terms of that. But I wanted to give a quick plug because, again, it's another project that's really moving forward and will hopefully be benefiting all of you as community members. As far as this project in particular with the site inventory, we at the county envision this really being a living document, much like the housing study is. It's not one that's just going to sit up on the shelf. Camoin has provided us with the document so that it's editable. So as properties come on the market that we hadn't seen before and it makes sense for housing, we can add in a profile for them, or hopefully, as properties go off the market and are developed for housing, we can take them out of the inventory and put new ones in. So we will be tracking that, and you will see as you review that Laura's name is at the bottom of every single page. Our hope is that as developers or municipalities read through the document and they have questions on a particular property, that Laura will be kind of the matchmaker and first person to reach out to, and then she can connect a developer with the municipality that's being profiled. The other next step, which we're pretty excited about, is we were recently awarded another service provider grant through the Department of Economic and Community Development's Housing Opportunities Program. And that is funding that is going to allow us to work with municipalities to assess specific properties in those towns to extend sewer and/or water infrastructure. So it's a feasibility fund grant that we're going to be engaging an engineer once we identify certain priority parcels that are hopefully in close proximity to sewer and/or water, and what that would look like for hopefully, again, doing some pre-development investigatory work to identify what it would cost to extend sewer and water, as well as looking at what funding opportunities are out there for that eventual construction. So that we just were awarded, we signed the contract the beginning of the month. And Alex Zaparo, our economic and community development planner, and Curtis Brown, our land use and transportation planner, will be taking that project on as the lead. So you'll be hearing from them in the next few weeks on that project as well. So with that, we're going to open it up for question and answers. So if you can use the raise hand function or just raise your hand in real time, or go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. I see John's hand up first. John Egan from Genesis Fund. Would you like to go ahead?
Hi, Emily. I'm going to ask my question first because I'm going to forget it if I don't get it out. I was curious to see such a successful response for identifying parcels. And what I was curious about was the landowners agreeing to have that much information shared, eventually knowing that this document would be circulated. And, I mean, there's at least 30 people on this call and others are going to see that. So I'm curious to ask Tom if there were any caveats from those landowners. Like, did you have to trade anything to get them to give you that information? Or I have a hard time seeing that all of those landowners would be that willing to share that much detail about their parcels unless there's just a whole lot more land for sale in Lincoln County than I ever thought there was. So I'm curious to see how the mechanics of that went in order to assemble the details.
Yeah, I mean,
Brief.
yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, as I said before, we kind of got a whole range of responses. There were certainly some people that, didn't want anything to do with this process, but I would say we were surprised to see that there was more interest than we maybe would have expected. Really, none of the information in here is private, like other than I mean, all of this information really is public access information. It's all in the assessment records, the size of the property, the ownership of the property, whether it has sewer, water, zoning, density. I mean, so it's not really like they were trading away any private information. It was really just, are you interested? And, some people were like, yeah, I've had this parcel forever. I don't have any plans for it. Sure, sign me up. and others were a little bit more skeptical, but then understood the point. So yeah, I mean, it went very smoothly, I would say overall. And the hardest part was just getting in contact with people. Once we actually connected with them, those conversations went pretty smoothly.
And I'll just add that we also have a very big caveat, disclaimer, whatever you want to call it, that Tom shared and Camoin shared with all the property owners is that the county is not mandating that this be used for housing. We're not looking to be in the business of owning property. And so really it's just a way to, highlight these parcels, and that the property owner said, I might not be interested in selling it at this moment, but also recognizing in the future their circumstances may change. So please keep us on the list. So these properties that are listed here, again, if we were to match make and, we had a developer call Laura tomorrow, it might be that they're not ready to sell just yet, but in the future they would have
Right.
interest.
That makes sense. That makes sense that not everybody's ready to go, hire a broker and put a sign out tomorrow. Great. Great. Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
It looks like there was a question in the chat from Lucian. So it's, hi, Emily, what sort of zoning ordinances do you find are hindering the development of affordable housing? Well, that is a loaded question. And I'll have my colleagues weigh in on this as well. I think we found that, and Laura, you can chime in too, because you're the ones that did most of the density bonus or the density build outs. I think one of the things we found is that some municipalities who may be served by sewer and water don't offer any sort of density change, even if you are connected to sewer and water. So it would still require you to build out at the same level as if you were putting in a private septic or well system, rather than allowing developers to kind of congregate the development on a smaller portion of the property or build more because they'd be connecting to a public utility. I think that one off the bat is probably the biggest find that we found. Laura, do you have any others off the top of your head?
Not necessarily. Like Emily said, just kind of focusing on, those areas that do have sewer and water. And in like a pretty rural county like Lincoln County, we're not going to see that in every area. So it's not going to be something that we can simply change. And obviously that's not directly related to land use, but I think that was a big focus on our end.
Tom, do you have any added thoughts to that one before we jump to, I see Matt has his hand up.
I think that's basically it. Just kind of, yeah, like some of these parcels are quite large, but the amount of density allowed is low, even in cases where maybe there is sewer and water. So just kind of, yeah, being able to really build intensely around that infrastructure is really the name of the game when trying to get affordable housing built.
And I would say we recognize too that there's a delicate balance with that, because we're also, well, we have municipalities that have sewer and water. It's not that we can suddenly build or would want to see, 300 units on a 5-acre parcel. There's a balance to that, especially given, we have communities that are focused on, they want to maintain that rural character. And so it's a matter of scale too. So kind of contemplating how you turn the concept of scale into a zoning ordinance is a bit of a balancing act, if you will. Matt, I saw your hand was up earlier. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, it relates to more of specific sites and potential developers. Is that appropriate? Okay. Okay. Some of you may know me as the former former town manager of Damascotta. I'm not affiliated with the town in any way now. What I know is I read on Lincoln County News. So I just want you to know that. I just have observations as a member of the commission. I see that you've got a site on Main Street in Damascotta, 0 Main Street. And I'm thinking that a site, and I'm familiar with that site. I think it's right next to Mobius. I think that would be great. Across the street from that site um, next to the coastal marketplace was well, it is a site that was proposed for development by a local doctor. And I just read that in the Lincoln County News a few weeks ago. I'm wondering if now well, he went to the planning board with the concept. The citizens on Vine Street didn't like it, and the coastal marketplace didn't wasn't interested in selling it to them. And apparently, there are designs to make that a park, which I personally think is unfortunate. But just to get to my point, I wonder if you want to call this doctor because he's interested in that site. His name is Dr. Stein. I don't know where he is, but that might be a possibility. And I'll forward this article to you. And then again, I think it's unfortunate that site on accessible by both Vine and Main is not available, because I think it would be a wonderful site for a small multifamily affordable housing place. But yeah, that's it. Oh, and then the other sites. One other one that we looked at for another project years ago was on Back Meadow Road, and the hospital was looking at that for their continuum of care memory facility. So I don't know if that's been looked at or not.
Thank you, Matt. We will take a look. And if you could share Dr. Stein's contact information with us, that would be super helpful. I know I was just chatting with Laura in direct message because we had a number of sites that, as Tom explained, that we kind of shrunk down because some people said no, or they said, oh, this site actually wouldn't work, but here's another one that we own that might be better. And so I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head because it was such a number of properties that we looked at. If both the Back Meadow property as well as the one that's on Vine Street were ones that we had looked at but had gotten a no or a non-response from. So we will check our records as well. Michael, I see your hand is up. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, related to the grant money for the technical assistance for water and sewer, would that engineering support extend to private septic and private wells?
For the grant that we just received, we're looking at it from public water and sewer supplies. So those existing utility districts that are in Lincoln County, looking at could we extend sewer and water to either sites that we have identified in this document, or if there are others that the towns themselves have found that they would like to try and prioritize as well. So we're not, unfortunately, we didn't include as part of the project scope looking at private septic and well or alternative septic systems like a on-site sewage treatment system, for example, that could serve a few units on a private lot rather than a public water supply.
Okay, so that will not be available then.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're going to keep looking for other grant opportunities. Like we had said, we're really not looking to have this be a document that sits on the shelf, if you will. So that may come later.
Thank you.
Who else might have a question? Oh, I see two hands up. The mics. I'll start with Michael Tomko, and then I'll go to Mike Martone in Damascata.
Thanks, Emily. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Terrific. I put my question to you in the chat just so that I didn't stumble over it. But my question is, can you help me understand the future growth opportunities document that you provided a link to on the RPC site? And specifically, because I know Booth Bay Harbor, I'm trying to understand what the growth areas that are listed in yellow mean. Because as I currently think of it, there are areas in there that I don't know that many are available for sale. So what do we do with this information? Do we as a community reach out to the homeowners and say, hey, you've got 5 acres or 10 acres or an extra 2 acres? Are you interested in approaching being approached by a developer, or how do we then act on this information?
Laura, do you want to, sorry, do you want to talk about the growth areas a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Mike. So those potential future growth area maps were completed as part of the housing needs assessment that we completed in 2023. And those areas that are highlighted that you're referencing show the growth areas, limited growth areas, rural, and then shoreland zoning, conservation, preservation, etc. So the goal with that was putting together the information based on the town's most recent comprehensive plan, which we know for Boothbay Harbor, Boothbay, and a couple other Lincoln County towns, they are quite out of date. So, that's what was referenced in the town's current, comprehensive plan, even if it is out of date. So that was the most recent one. So those areas are what the town put as zoning areas that are looking for future growth or could accommodate growth, if that
Okay,
helps.
so do you have is this then that we maybe like form a economic and housing development committee, and you know, because yes, we're actually updating our comprehensive plan. We're starting on a process in July, and how do we then try and shake the area loose and open up more housing? Um, Everyone always says Boothbay Harbor is all completely built out, uh, but there are areas that just aren't developed. So how do we take this to the next step to go towards developing?
So I think your timing is excellent in that you are going to be undertaking a comp plan process pretty soon, right? For Boothbay Harbor, at least that's what I've heard. And so what things you can look for, and certainly it's an opportunity for a lot of public engagement around as you update the comp plan, is looking at your future land use section. And so identifying, do you want to expand or alter your growth areas? Is there zoning changes that could be made, like density pieces in certain locations? The extension of sewer and water may be another one. The other piece is also, so the zoning would play a big role in hopefully being able to make those changes. If the town has interest, I know pre-COVID there was a joint economic development group between Boothbay and Boothbay Harbor, and so maybe there's interest in reviving that or at least doing it on a local level in Boothbay Harbor. So trying to assess, what else could be done, utilizing creating a TIF district, for example, supporting, meeting with developers. Is there any property that the town owns that might have interest in kind of using for development? So there's probably a lot that could be looked at. And I think the timing is right, given that you're about to update your comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Martone, go ahead.
Thanks. I had, I guess, at least one clarifying question, because I imagine people here may have different ideas of what, when you talk about kind of like large scale development, what we're talking about. So I was just wondering, when we're talking about sites that can accommodate like a relatively large development, like what are we talking about? Are we talking about 500 units? Are we talking about 50 units? Are we talking about 10 units?
Yeah. Yeah, of the sites that we kind of looked at, none of the sites could accommodate more than about, there were a few with like 200 units, there were a handful with 100, but most of them are, especially, the ones in the growth areas are mostly in, a couple dozen units range, and then in the more rural areas, anywhere from like 5 to 10. So there weren't any parcels identified that would accommodate 500 units. But it also just kind of has to do with the size of the parcel too. Like, if it's a really large parcel, yeah, like in theory, it could accommodate a lot of units, but the density levels that we're talking about aren't much greater than like townhouses.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I know scale came up, and Newcastle's doing a lot of interesting, or has done a lot of interesting stuff around trying to address scale. which I think is good because I certainly don't want to scare any residents back into their groundhog holes when they see a new development, and just shut down everything. Um, the other question I have is, it seems like what's been identified here is most or is entirely kind of undeveloped individual parcels. And I, around Newcastle and Damerscott, I see there is a decent amount of land that's undeveloped, but it might be split up between three, four, five property owners that have like one building off in a corner. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how to include that in this kind of project, the either the undeveloped, well, kind of larger sites that maybe need to be cobbled together, or also just maybe they're already individual parcels, they're not on sewer, and we could either, split them in half, something that's like, okay, there's a little bit of development there, but we can encourage more. Um, Basically anything that's outside of this, just like nothing's developed on this single parcel.
Right. Yeah, yeah. What you bring up is kind of a blind spot when you're doing a GIS analysis, right? Like we're focusing on vacant parcels. We're not focusing on maybe groups of vacant parcels or pieces of parcels that might be vacant. And so, this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the parcels that are appropriate for housing in the county. It's just kind of the 30 that were the best that we could identify. In that case, it's usually just kind of folks in the town that have the idea for those types of parcels. Everyone knows, okay, this site's not being utilized to its full potential. There's only development on a certain area of it. And so it's kind of, between town staff and groups, housing advocacy groups or whoever it might be in the communities, just to kind of raise them, surface those opportunities. And at the end of the day, it does come down to whether the property owner is interested or not. So, if the property owner can be identified, if you can have open conversations with them, hey, would you ever consider this? Then, it's worth, kicking it over to the Lincoln County crew and having them add to the inventory. And it'd be great, the more that people can add to this list and to have all of these parcels in one place makes it a lot more friendly to developers that don't have to do as much legwork. So, however these parcels come up and become of public, or however you come across parcels that have potential, definitely, have those conversations with owners and then pass them along, I would say.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Tom. And please, if there are towns that have, kind of those circumstances, we want to hear from them. I know we have said ad nauseum that we want this to be a living document, and so we have the means to be able to, add to this and make edits and hopefully make it useful. I see there's a question in the chat, and then I see Jen's hand is up, so I'm going to quickly do the question in the chat, and then Jen, I'll go to you. So George Tace, who is Wiscasset's code enforcement officer and also a select board member in Edgecombe, asked, is there currently a network of developers? The answer is yes. We've sent it out to a number of developers for this workshop as well as the document itself. Specifically, we sent it to the developers that we know of who are working on projects in Lincoln County at the moment. We're also building up our network of developers outside of Lincoln County, but other parts of Maine and New England as well. And that's because we're seeing, and I'm sure you've all noticed it as well, is that development has been creeping up the Maine coast. So it started in southern Maine, Portland exploded, now it's in the Bath Brunswick area, and we're starting to see more interest in Lincoln County. And so we are going to continue to share this in, our office, especially, myself, Laura, Curtis, Alex in particular. We've all been developing relationships with those developers in hopes that we can be, that matchmaker, and not work just on behalf of the developers, but really the interests of our municipalities, and be that spokesperson when talking with them. George, your second part of the question was, has the 70-acre parcel on Churchill Street in Wiscasset been looked at? Laura and I have to go back and check. I'm pretty sure it had been, and I don't remember if it ended up in the report or if it was one that the property owner gave feedback on. Laura, do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, George, if you look at page 31 of the document, it highlights two about 30-acre parcels on Churchill Street. So I'm not sure if that's the one you're referencing, but if it is in there.
And I see Aaron Krastowski, who's the Wisconsin's Economic Development Director, did confirm it is in the report. Thank you, Aaron. Jen, do you have a question?
Yeah. Just a concern that we are explicit in explaining, because it's this document and of course the other study is going to be out there. I think we need to be explicit so people understand that the difference between affordable housing development and subsidized housing development. And so in order for people to not have a knee-jerk reaction, if there's a way to make it clear that we're actually talking about workforce housing, and maybe if there's a place that either links to some data, which I've seen recently, some even more frightening data about housing, house values and income, and how far apart they are now for qualifying for mortgages, etc. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I think it might be smart to do that.
Great suggestion, Jen. I appreciate that. And I think we'll probably talk internally. We've been doing a light rollout of this just because we know there might be some pushback from some residents. There might be strong support, hopefully, from others. And we're also going to do some direct outreach to the developers themselves. So as we continue to roll it out, I think that's a great data set to incorporate and kind of another disclaimer, if you will.
The other thing to remember too is if you need support, our businesses all over the coast are still unable to fully staff and still suffering, and not being able to open your full hours on the summer season means that you don't have the income you need for the winter. So if you need support, I think you might find some there.
That's another fantastic point. Thank you, Jen. We appreciate it. And we'll probably be in touch with you offline after this meeting too. Great. I see in the chat, Aaron asked, would we be willing to share a list of possible developers? I would think so. We'll talk internally and get back in touch with you, Aaron, on that one. And then I see Mike Tomko added to the chat. Does anyone have reasonable suggestions or plans on how to manage the seasonal rental aspect of housing? Our town, being Booth Bay Harbor, like many, is challenged by the quantity of year-round dwelling units being shifted to seasonal-only uses. I see some head shaking no. Oh, John, I see your hand went up.
Yeah, I mean, it may be too late to close the barn door, but I think if you're already seeing indicators in many towns, particularly anything that's nearby the water, have already sort of seen a lot of their available stock flip to short-term rentals, is for the municipality to try and get, again, maybe not be getting out in front of it, but to try and catch up to it, and at least start off with a registration and some sort of inventory tool so that you at least know how many you have, and then consider maybe a fee in order to create one so that you have some income there to pay your code officer or somebody else to kind of go do some inspections. And those are a couple of things to try out. And if you make it just a little bit of a challenge to get a registration and or a permit or something like that, then you may cut down on people who just, spend 2 hours on a Sunday night and take their empty house and turn it into an STR, because that's about all it takes. In other parts of the country, there are actual ordinances prohibiting this, and they've gotten into lots of legal battles about property rights. The primary argument is that short-term rental is a lodging and therefore a commercial activity. And many of the short-term rentals are being conducted in primarily residential or residential only zones. So there's a potential consideration of that. In my community, we had that conversation. It lasted about 5 minutes. That the town would consider incorporating some sort of language in zoning to prohibit it. And there's too many property owners that were screaming about, you can't take away my property rights. But at the same time, those property rights are benefiting certain people and impacting negatively other people because of sort of ignoring the commercial activity. Um, and then the last thing I'll say, because we tackled this for a long time in my community, is to consider seeing the distinction between an owner-occupied or what's called a hosted short-term rental and a non-hosted or an investor-owned short-term rental. And I do think there would be some general consensus or more likelihood for general consensus that those are really two different distinct operations of a typical residential house property in a residential zoned area that's operating as a commercial activity. If it's a REIT from Maryland, nothing against Maryland, that owns 5 houses on the street that has 12 houses, and 5 of them are rented out to short-term rentals. That's you live in a hotel area now at this point because the traffic coming and going and cars and noise and garbage and everything else. So I think there's the peer-to-peer economy of short-term rentals and what people can do with an internet connection has outstripped and outpaced ordinance from local governments to be able to keep up with. So they have to race pretty quickly to catch up to it.
I would
Great,
just
thank
add
you.
on to what John said. Communities have done the whole range of, not allowing altogether to, not having any regulations. Some kind of middle of the road type communities have limited the number of nights per year that you can have an unhosted rental. So, you can only have it 30 nights a year or something like that. And so, that's kind of appeases the owners to some degree, but also limits it from happening every day and really kind of ruling out. It's also, you have to think of it as like it's a revenue comparison for the owner. Does it make more sense to rent it out for 30 nights a year, or does it make more sense to rent it to a year-round person? And so understanding how that math works in a given community can help kind of dial in a policy that would try to strike some sort of balance.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? I see Michael Martone's hand is up. Mike?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. I think that as far as short-term rental, let me just want to quickly address that. In Newcastle, we consider short-term rentals as like a land use, like you would multifamily housing, and you'd have to register it. I think that we still have to have this conversation about whether or not we're going to regulate it and try and tamp it down. But one thing that I know that we're going to run into is the enforcement side. And right now, people, even without, like, we don't even tell you can't do it, and people aren't really registering. So making sure that if you're going to make that rule, roll a regulation out, that you have that enforcement, because they look like any other house, right? So it's kind of hard to even find them if people aren't voluntarily registering them. And so that's one thing that I've just noticed in both the towns, that like the enforcement side of it is a tricky one. But the other thing was, I would love to. I mean, we want kind of a variety of housing, but if we can get some housing that maybe not like in like bad areas, but doesn't have a water view, and maybe it's multifamily housing, those are going to be, I think, a little less attractive to short-term rentals than the nice big house right on the water. So I think the kind of housing we develop could tie into this, I think, in an important way, as well as regulation. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Great, thank you. From the enforcement side, I think that's a good point to bring up. One of the things we at the RPC have been seeing is that Some municipalities have taken a light touch, and I think John Egan touched on this a little bit, is that if you at the very least have a registration process, so you have contact information, if heaven forbid, someone's septic system backs up because they've been renting it out to, 10 people a weekend for the past, 12 weekends in the summer, there's contact information for whomever is operating that short-term rental. The other nice piece with the registration is that you have a handle on how many units are out there. And it also gives you some teeth in terms of a complaint-based enforcement. So while it's hard to enforce when you have a code enforcement officer who's part-time or per diem, but at least if there's some regulation in there that says that they need to register in the registry, if neighbors are seeing, different cars from out of state or whom even with a main license plate coming in and out, and there's way more people in there than in normal, they have the ability to go to the town office and say, hey, I'm noticing that my neighbor is doing this. I can see it's listed on Airbnb or Verbo. Have they signed on to the registration? And so it's that complaint-based enforcement. It's not ideal and it's not perfect, but at least it's a step in the right direction, and gives the municipality a little bit of teeth in terms of how they then handle it when the complaint comes in. Mike Tomko, I see your hand is raised.
Thanks, Emily. One other aspect of that is not just the short-term part, but we're finding houses that are being purchased and are only being used seasonally. And other than homestead type things, I don't know that there's much that we can do about that. Kenny Field was a street that used to be very desirable for a lot of the working class families, and that was the street all the kids would go on for Halloween. And now over half of the homes there are seasonally occupied. And I just don't know how to combat that, other than looking to other areas for additional development. And Kenny Fields, I mean, it's within walking distance of downtown, but you don't have any great views there either. So yeah, it's no easy solutions, are there? Thank you.
All right. Anyone else with questions, comments? I see Michael Martone. Go ahead.
I just was curious about conversations that maybe you've had with any developers that are in the area. I think Mike Lutkus asked about, or Matt Lutkus, sorry, asked about there was a developer that was looking at Vine Street, and I've spoken with him, but I haven't really had very many conversations with developers of like, I guess, kind of multi-use residential specifically. And I'm just kind of curious if you have had any conversations, what their main concerns are. If it's, the permitting process, then, we're working on it. But I'm just wondering if they have any other items that the town might be able to address, or what their concerns are generally.
Sure. We've had just a few conversations, and most of them have been with housing nonprofits as well as the developers who are working on projects that secured ARPA funding through the county. I would say I wouldn't necessarily call it a concern. I think it's more figuring out, the permitting process. I think is always an easy complaint to say it could go faster. I will also say, as a land use planner, I'm biased because I feel like you do need at least some type of permitting process, but certainly tweaks could be made. I think the biggest hiccup, at least in the immediate, is funding and financing. So, in the environment that we're in right now, there have been some federal programs that have been pulled back or sunset. There's also a massive need for funding for projects across the state, which, Maine Housing's programs are, quickly applied for and dispersed, but there's just not enough money to go around. And so I think it's just making the math work has been, kind of what we've been hearing. But what we're hopeful for is that this release of our site inventory will open up the dialogue a bit more so that we can talk to other developers as well as hear from them, what would make things move a little bit faster, whether it's permitting or helping to access financing or funding. And if there's other issues that we just haven't been aware of too. And I'll open it up to any staff at Lincoln County if you've heard other things and want to chime in on this. Um, Evan, if I can pick on you, I see you've been adding some things to the chat, especially around LD 140. Would you mind sharing on that?
That's a bill to incrementally increase the homestead exemption by, I believe, currently it's $25,000 off your value, and they want to increase it $5,000 a year until it reaches, I believe, 50. But yeah, from my perspective, there's a lot of states that the homestead exemption starts at like 200,000. So if you want to, I look at it from a legislature perspective, and it's a lot of capacity for towns to check on all these different mechanisms, but tax them out of that second house. I'm not bashful.
Michael Broussard, I see your hand is up. Would you like to ask your question or make your comment?
Does the Planning Commission provide technical support if we're in unincorporated territory? So, for example, working with Loopsy on some creative adjustments to requirements that might make some things possible on a crazy place like Monhegan. Yeah, is that part of your basket of services?
Yeah, so our basket of services, and I'm going to call on Alex in just a minute to speak more, especially about the relationship with Loopsy, because Alex has really great connections with staff at the Land Use Planning Commission. But just a quick reminder, especially if you're new to getting to know us, we are a Land Use Planning Commission. However, we are also unique in that we're a Department of County Government. So we offer services to all 19 municipalities in Lincoln County. And so that is something, and housing is one of our strategic priorities. And so we're always here to help, and we're always here to be a resource, whether it's more targeted assistance, like finding who you should be talking to at the state level and making that connection, or if it's helping on a project itself. So with that, Alex, if I could just have you give a quick plug around the relationship, especially with Loopsy and Monhegan.
Sure, and I think they prefer to be called the LUPC. But yeah, I worked a lot with the LUPC, Michael, when I was with the Island Institute, specifically for Monhegan, and actually really a ton with Matinicus. The one thing I know about Monhegan and the state's land use ordinance is that affordable housing actually, the way it's written, there is a ton of leeway, like a lot of bonuses for affordable housing. So I didn't know if you were aware of that with the state land use ordinance. But I do work with them. I still do. I work with Tim Carr. So your land use, as we're sort of we provide assistance for towns throughout Lincoln County. Someone like Michael offers assistance for and works for a couple of towns, or Max and Waldeboro. The LUPC is your planning department, and I work with Tim Carr really closely. Tim is incredibly willing to work with the island on either finding creative ways that work within the ordinance. And I believe we've talked about this before, Michael, but they very much are interested if there's any interest in creating overlay zones, or any way that they can create something that's locally led, and allows for more leeway in the ordinance itself. But with affordable housing, there's already a ton of provisions in there that allow you to do a lot more than you would for regular residential development. And I think that project you all are working on, that's coming up, their LUPC is eager and waiting for a phone call and a meeting to work closely with you all to do whatever they can to sort of grease the wheels to create more development there.
Thanks for the heads up on the preferred name. That's old habits, sorry.
Oh
Thank you.
yeah, no, trust me, if I didn't talk to them all the time, I would call them Loopsy or Lurk if it was 20 years ago.
Mhm. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. So I do recognize it is 3 o'clock or a few minutes after. We had planned for an hour, but we can certainly go a little bit longer if there are more questions, but we also want to be mindful of your time. So with that, if there are people that need to drop off because you have another meeting or you want to get out before it rains to mow your lawn, I know that's been tough to do the past couple of weeks. We understand. Otherwise, we're happy to stay on for a little bit longer and answer more questions. Oh, I see Erica. Are you just saying hi or are you raising your hand?
Saying hi and thank you for this. It's been extremely useful. Seriously. Much appreciation to your great work.
Oh, thank you, Erica. And if you have questions, please reach out. We'd be happy to chat about the methodology of this more too.
Fabulous. I likely will.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions? Lucian, I see your hand.
Yeah, I think I have more of a comment than a question. We've recently had a fairly large affordable housing project done here in Booth Bay, and I think that this project it was done and it was done within ordinance, et cetera, but it really could have been done in a better place. And I'm hoping that maybe this tool will help people to identify better places for these affordable housing clusters, because the affordable housing that we have is on a secondary local road, and it's just really hard for it to handle the amount of traffic that's going to get, but it's still within the rules. So I think this is going to be a tool maybe for us to help direct people to better sites for affordable housing than just whatever fits into the regulation.
Great. Glad to hear it. Anyone else? Oh, I see Jen, you raised your hand.
I just had a thought. So what are the next steps? When are you going to release this? How are you going to release this? And then how would you like interested parties? So it could be municipalities or developers, or maybe even people who want to create a development, whatever. How do you like step by step? How do you want them to contact you? Do you want them to hit the municipality first if they're not already? I mean, how do you? Yeah.
Sure. So we officially released this a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago now, to the county commissioners. It's live on our website. The next step, like I said, we were kind of doing a soft rollout with this workshop. So we sent this, the report as well as the invite to today's workshop to about over 100 people in Lincoln County, knowing they're interested parties, municipalities, planning boards, developers, housing nonprofits, financial institutions. And so what we will do is, again, once the recording is live, send it out. So anyone that wants to help publicize it, if you know of people who are interested, please do. We're also looking to submit copies, a hard copy like we did the housing study, to every municipality so they have it in their town office. We're also going to be trying to do some more direct outreach with developers. And then if you know of someone that's interested in one of the properties or is the property owner and wants to talk more because they've heard from someone, please reach out to our office. We have Laura's contact information on the bottom of every page, but this is a staff project. So if you want to send it to myself or Curtis or Alex, please feel free. And we're hoping to, keep publicizing this. We'll probably put together some press releases as well to submit not just to our local papers, but to some of the bigger ones across the state. And our hope is that, with this project, as well as the service provider grant that we recently received from the Housing Opportunities Program at DECD, that will be kind of taking it incrementally in terms of implementation and taking some of the sites we've identified in this report and now looking at what's the feasibility to extend utilities, so sewer and water, to those properties, and does that then become more desirable to a developer, especially if it increases the potential density on those sites. So I'm hoping that answers your question, Jen, but also happy to talk more in the coming weeks as we continue to roll this out.
I was mostly also thinking, should I throw this out to our economic development committee in town, or
I think
share
that would be great. Yeah.
share with our businesses, as if anybody's interested in going through all the data, which I think is very helpful, but I know it takes a bit. But
Right.
okay, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jen. Okay.
I have one question. Someone had asked me if there will be notes today, and I suspect, Laura, you're uploading this on YouTube.
Yes. Yeah, this will be on our YouTube.
And sometimes you can optimize the closed caption so that it breaks it down by sections. I don't know. We can talk about that. But if we do have notes, perhaps we can share them upon request.
Yeah, I would think so. And we can talk about it as a staff. We're going to be sending an email to everyone that we invited with the link to the YouTube page to start once that's live. But we can also talk internally about putting some notes together, high-level notes to share out as well, too. Great. Well, we appreciate all of you attending today. We're excited, enthusiastic to see this much interest in housing in Lincoln County and how we can continue to advance work on this topic. We're especially appreciative to Tom and Camoin Associates for continuing to work on this with us, both for the housing needs assessment back in 2022 and 2023, as well as this project for the site inventory. So huge thanks to Camoin Associates for their assistance. Continued assistance to us in Lincoln County. So we will be in touch when the recording is live. And with that, we thank you all for attending, and we hope to work with you soon on continuing this project. Thank you so much.